Hello and welcome back to another video of Forgotten WIP 2. This time a bit of a special video because I want to look at a WIP map that I am working at, just to show you what I'm doing at the moment. Before I start, note that it's very WIP, so anything is subject to change and it does not reflect the state of the final product and so on, blah blah blah. Okay, so the map is called Ogledow, or I think it's actually pronounced Ogledow, which is going to be an Eastern Front map featuring the Germans against the Russians. So let's take a look at it, shall we? The map itself, I will say something about the history later. The map itself is a sector push map, and it features lots of heavy German armor, because this is actually the first time that the King Tiger tank was used on the Eastern Front, and it went horribly wrong. The Russians managed to ambush these new tanks, took most of them out. I will go into a bit more detail about that later. Anyway, I've been working on this map for quite a bit now, although not really lately. Lately I've had not that much time due to real life stuff, and also because we worked on 2.52. I made the new 16 and 32 player versions and worked on that a bit. So this map has kind of become a bit of a not a side project, but left behind a bit. So let's look at it, shall we? So, as I mentioned, it's a sector push map, and the idea was to make a kind of like a sector push map to end all sector push maps, kind of the perfect, almost stereotypical sector push map. So you have three sectors: Sector 1, Sector 2, and Sector 3. And what I decided to do is give each of these sectors, so to speak, its own main base. So if you look at the first one, for example, the Russians can spawn on each flag, but they also have a third main base spawn behind the two flags where they get their armor. Same here, you have two flags in the sector, then a main base flag back here, and then one flag here, and the main base on the other side of the river. So, for now we'll switch to the German side. Now, as you can see, as I said, everything is WIP, nothing is really light mapped on this map, so everything is way too bright, and there are no proper shadows or anything, and some stuff is still open for change. So as I said, this map features a lot of heavy armor. To give you a short rundown of the historical background, in the summer of 1944, the Red Army started a huge offensive called Operation Bagration in Belorussia, which was the biggest defeat ever suffered by German arms. I think all in all 450,000 casualties were incurred, and Army Group Center was basically overrun. Now, this doesn't play in June 1944 when that started, but 2 months later in August, when the Red Army had actually reached Poland. So this is in Poland. And they had seized a bridgehead, well actually several bridgeheads, over the Vistula River, which the Germans didn't like, because they wanted to make their stand at that river, because rivers are easy to defend and so on. So they tried to destroy these bridgeheads with all they got, and what they got were, for the first time, King Tiger tanks, which they sent into battle here, where they subsequently got ambushed by Russian T-34s, and a lot were knocked out, and others were captured, actually intact, by the Russians and brought back to Kubinka to be tested. So quite the embarrassing debut here. And yeah, this all happened here in the vicinity of the city of Stashov. Now, some among you might remember there was an FH1 map called Stashov area, or Stashov area. That's actually based on this battle, although this one is way more accurate. This is actually how the actual terrain looks. It's just a bit scaled down. So let's look at it. The first sector. Yeah, well, you know what? Let's go to the Russian side again to look at the defenses. First sector is called Ogledow, and that's the actual village. In reality, the Germans took this without much problem on the first day of the offensive. They basically drove in there. I've placed some defenses here for the map, so there's actually something going on here. So what then happened is they drove from the village down here towards Stashov, this city here, and in this area the tanks got ambushed by T-34s that hid among the wheat fields and forests here and in the orchards, and several King Tigers were taken out. There was also a huge artillery strike placed on the village, and after that the Russians walked into the village and basically the Germans had retreated and left several of their King Tigers behind. There's actually a site on the web that I used where you can look at where the wrecks and tanks were located. I think 3 or 4 wrecks were located in this area, and many tanks were captured here. So anyway, the first sector is basically a village, and I just wanted to show you this. This is the Russian main base for this first sector, where they got their 3 T-34s, which is of course not much to hold back the King Tigers, but as I said, the first sector is more... I like to have it in sector push maps. I mean, Omaha is one exception, but usually in sector push maps you want to start relatively easy for the attackers, and then it gets harder and harder until there's a huge kind of a huge finale in the last sector. And this is designed with that principle in mind. So from this main base, what the Russians actually can do, you can climb into the tanks, of course, and then use this ridge line here as a defensive position, because you can do some shoot and scooting, because this over there, you see that other ridge line, that's where the Germans will be coming from. So you can, for example, hide behind the buildings, do some long-range shooting, and then scoot down back behind the ridge line, drive along this road and pop up in a different position, for example, behind that house or behind here. Well, that's kind of the idea for the tanks here. Other than that, the Russians, of course, can use mines to kill the King Tigers, even though the terrain is pretty open. Around the flag zones, there's lots of little bottlenecks where a well-placed anti-tank mine can take out a King Tiger. Let's look at this first sector from the German perspective. So what you can see right now is there are actually 2 main bases and forward spawns. Usually I don't like to do 2 main bases, but in this case it actually works out. Because I will show you on the ground. Now, originally the idea was, if you're in the German main base, you can either drive straight through here at the defenses, or if you're more cautious, you drive through here, then flank from the north, like this. I think it's in testing, the testers rarely did that, so I decided to just place a second spawn there to make it a bit more clear. And also a tank spawn. So yeah, this is a German main base in the village of, I think it's called Nimchice or something like that. I will have to look that up. And the Germans will have to attack from here. Now, there's this huge advantage in that they have these King Tigers, 2 of them actually, which I think is unprecedented. However, they do have the drawback that the terrain is pretty open. So there's not much cover. There's not much of a possibility to sneak around for infantry. You really have to push through with sheer force, a bit like on Silo Heights. The Russians really have to play very aggressively here. It's the same here, but for the Germans. So, yeah, if you look here, I mean, you can go through the ditches, but once you crest this hill here, that's where the Russian tanks will be, and the Russian infantry, of course, will be hiding between these buildings. Of course, if I was clever, I would probably go through this orchard area here. There's at least some concealment where you can go into cover. So yeah, I wanted to do an Eastern Front map that looks a bit more cheery and has nice weather. Because so far the Eastern Front maps that we have all are not necessarily bleak, but usually a bit on the dark side, and usually they play in autumn or in spring. Anyway, so this is one of the two flags in the sector, the so-called observation post. The idea here is that the Russians didn't really completely fortify this area, but put like a reconnaissance unit in here or something in order to delay the Germans for a bit. So we have these small trenches and positions built between the houses, as well as some anti-tank guns. And Microsoft wants to sell me Office, even though I already have Office. So go fuck yourself, Microsoft, you stupid idiots. Jesus Christ, what a bunch of cunts. I mean, they actually place adware on your computer. I mean, how can they live with themselves? Anyway, so here we have some Russian anti-tank gun positions in the yard surrounding the village, as well as Maxim guns, of course. So yeah, generally I was going for a relatively untouched look for this map, so there's no huge bomb craters, there's no destroyed buildings, or completely destroyed buildings at least. So yeah, this is the flag zone. Yeah, if you want, you can grab a sniper rifle, for example, and either go up here and defend from here. So as you can see, that's the orchard that we came from. So in reality, we would probably have been under fire from the sniper from here. Or if you don't want to do that, you can always go into this barn building here, climb up here. You have another sniper's nest. Oh, by the way, the water is not finished, it's still fucked up, so just ignore that. You can have a nice field of fire here for when the Russians crest this hill. So, now what, let's take a look at the second main base that I've been talking about. Now, as I said, this is supposed to be a flanking position, because if you look at the defenses that the Russians have, they don't cover the whole front here, because, as I said, the idea is it's like a reconnaissance unit or a listening post. So the defenses go kind of like this, like in a triangle here. So this flank can be used to get around that. There's forests here that the Germans can use to maneuver behind to get into positions where the Russians don't really see them coming. So that gives them a bit of an advantage in the first sector. So yeah, this is the second main base. I also get 2 tanks here. It's generally a relatively tank-heavy map, also an APC. And again, yeah, from here you can also outflank and attack the first sector. And as I said, the terrain is relatively open. By the way, in real life, what the Russians actually did is they hid their tanks in haystacks like this to ambush the German King Tigers. Sadly, this is not really possible to really do in-game. It would probably be really gimmicky. Yeah, because in-game you would simply learn which of the haystacks are the dangerous ones, and there would be all kinds of problems with it. So yeah, from here you can theoretically flank down here behind this forest, and then you're in their flank. So here we have another Russian position in this village, and this is the other flag zone. I think it's, at the moment, it's just called Barn. I would probably call it like Ogledow. Oh, by the way, there's a new feature that Gavrant coded in. When a flag is being kept now, you can see this thing, the push marker, it's blinking around it. And this also works, I think, if the flag is locked. So if somebody is clever and tries to pre-cap a flag, now you can actually see it and deal with it. So that should give give people a bit more tactical flexibility. So yeah, generally speaking, this map is characterized by a lot of Russian anti-tank guns, or Packfront as the Germans often call that kind of tactic, where you really concentrate a lot of anti-tank guns, like here's another one over here. This is the village entrance. And I usually place these in positions where they are kind of, you can't shoot at them from many directions, because usually there are buildings in the way from here, but you can cover, for example, the horizon here. So if German tanks crest that, you get the drop on them. But of course, static anti-tank guns are always mildly useful at best. Much like these anti-tank rifles here. So yeah, now we have captured the first sector, and as you can see, the Germans also got a new main base. Now, in this sector, the tanks don't switch forward yet, but you get a completely new main base. Look at it, with transport and everything. So once you capture the sector, you also get the necessary tools to move on. Again, it's kind of, I want to perfect this idea of a sector push map. So yeah, this is the new German main base now. So, what next? Okay, so now as you can see, the second sector is unlocked. And let's have a look at that from the Russian perspective. Now, the second sector looks completely different from the first one, which I think is important. I think in sector push maps, usually it should be very easy to tell apart the different sectors, so you get a sense of progression and a sense of a story being told. So in the second sector, which is where the ambush actually happened, this is made to look like this is the main Russian line of defense. So this is where they really wanted to make their stand. Now, it's not a really prepared defensive line with like concrete bunkers and deep trench systems, but it's more like the Russian unit came here, they placed their anti-tank guns, and the infantry started digging slit trenches, which is usually what happens in real life. So there's no barbed wire strung or anything, but it is a strong position. So it's kind of placed in a reverse slope, as you can see here. So as soon as the German tanks crest the sill line, you can shoot them in the face. And there's lots of trenches that you can use as infantry to hide in. And also in front of the trenches there are listening positions, much like in real life, from where you can, for example, throw anti-tank grenades or just ambush Germans that don't suspect it. Like in this cornfield here, you can lie in one of these and wait, and then if you hear the Germans coming, you pop out and, for example, throw a hand grenade or something. A bit like spider holes. This is basically how these functioned, these kind of defense systems. And of course, here you also again have, as the Russians, the advantage that without tank support, German infantry is pretty exposed. I mean, this is not really Normandy kind of terrain where you can easily sneak through. And there's lots of these little slit trenches and prepared positions. Now, every map that we have usually has at least a few new statics associated with it to make it look more unique. For example, here we have this Polish road cross, which is a feature because Poland, and especially this area here in eastern Poland, is very, very, very Catholic. And they put these crosses up, these crucifixes everywhere, put flowers in front of them and stuff like that. So, as I said, this is the main line of resistance. You can see a trench that leads into this orchard where there are more little foxhole forward positions. Won't look at that now. And behind this there's actually a second line of trenches. Now note how, if you don't know these fortifications are there, they're actually pretty well hidden. Like they're at the edge of this forest there. So to the casual observer, you probably won't be able to see them at once. So yeah, here is the second line of defense at the edge of this forest. Got an anti-tank rifle here and another anti-tank gun. Lots of anti-tank guns. And then you have these connection trenches leading forward to the main line. So you can get there, because this also works as a Russian spawning area. So you can easily get to the forward line here. And this thing here, that's the second flag in the sector. The first one is the actual defense line. The second line is a manor building. Now this area, this manor building, is completely WIP because Roughbeak is at the moment, that's one of our modeler devs, he's at the moment working on a new Polish-looking manor. So far I only have this Normandy building that you probably are all familiar with there as a placeholder. So there's lots of Russian trenches in this area generally that you can use to hide from the tanks and ambush people. Here you can get into the actual manor building. So there will be a nice looking Polish manor there, hopefully, which will be the centerpiece of this flag. And then of course you have these were made by I think Missy actually made these. It's a while. These can of course be used on other maps as well. Little greenhouses, so it looks like they grow their stuff in there. Looking at it, as I said, I will have to redesign this area anyway once the manor building is done, and I'm kind of thinking about setting this apart a bit more, this area. Maybe by making a fence around it or something, or kind of maybe putting it on like an elevated position almost. We will see, or you will see. Maybe I will make a follow-up video where I look at this area and say, hey, look at this. This is what I have done with it. That could be fun, actually. Yeah, as I said, I haven't worked on this map for a while now, so I'm actually kind of rusty on what my plans were and what still needs doing. So this is also kind of for me to look at what I did with it. So yeah, over here we have more Russian positions in these village houses. Again, lots of trenches, lots of anti-tank guns, that kind of thing. And this is the border of the map. There's kind of hard to see from here, but there's a little river running there on the north side, which acts as the northern map border. Yeah, as I said, the water is not done, but yeah, this is the river area, which is where the map ends. Generally speaking, it's a pretty big map. I think it's about as big as Vosenak, I would say. Maybe a bit more narrow, but certainly as long. So as you can see here on the mini-map, you can actually see the tanks in the Russian main base. Let's respawn there and then look at the last sector. And after that I will end the video. I think then you saw enough for now. So in this, take a different weapon for some visual variety. So yeah, this is the Russian main base for the second sector. And as you can see, the more the Germans advance, the more sectors they take. The Russians get more and more tanks and bigger tanks as well, which of course will mean that the going keeps getting harder. So there are more tanks here. And there in the background you can see the town of Stashov, which is what this is all about. This town is not really part of the gameplay area. This is more like, you know how in Siege of Tobruk you can see Tobruk in the distance, but you can't actually go there in that map. So it's a bit like that. We're fighting for an industrial area on the outskirts of it. So you have lots of, industrial style statics here. One thing. So I'm not going to do that now because the video is already running long. But once the Germans capture the sector, they get a new main base here where all their tanks respawn. So the front completely switches forward, and they also get more transport at these flags so they can attack this last sector. Now, as I said, the last sector is at the outskirts of this, it's at the outskirts of this town. and it's an industrial area, and it kind of works like a last stand type fortress, where you have walls all around, and the Russians have transformed it into a fortress. So yeah, these outskirts of Stashov. As you can see, I have reskinned some of the buildings to look a bit more Eastern European, and not so much like something from Belgium or France. So from here, you can get into this Russian fortress area, this industrial area. There's lots of pickup Panzerfaust kits here for that last stand, so you can take out the King Tiger even as infantry. And yeah, this is the centerpiece of this area. And as you can see, this is all walled in. And the Russians have placed trenches all around here to protect them against artillery fire, and so they can move around from one hole in the line to the next. They have knocked holes into some of these buildings and placed machine guns, or down there anti-tank guns in there. And as you can see, as always, the area around it is pretty open. So this is really a formidable position that the Germans have to take, so they have to use their King Tigers, well, I guess a bit better than they did in real life, really push in here. And in this sector, the last main base is up here, which at the moment nothing spawns in there because the second sector is still Russian. But once this final sector is active, the Russians will get a lot of tanks in there, including, I believe, 2 IS-2s and an Su-152. Oh, yeah, I have to fix that. So they really can, so they really have this last sector locked down, and you have to break in as the Germans. There's also the bridge, which the Germans did manage to blow up. This is a nice little detail. Germans blew up the bridge and one of the tanks fell into the water. So this is the same northern border river as before. But the Russians, of course, have placed pontoon bridges here so you can cross the water. Also anti-tank guns and everything. And this is where the final Russian main base would be. At the moment it's empty. So yeah, now before I end this video, I will try something, because you can actually get across here, and I've done it before, but I will probably fall into the water now. But you can actually jump across here and then walk here. So if you're an enterprising infantry player, you can still use this bridge. So I think that's nifty. So anyway, yeah, this is my new map that I'm working on. Don't know how long it will take. Depends on how much time I have to finish it up, and also how fast the manor building gets finished as well. Yeah, I'm quite excited about it. So tell me in the comments if you like it so far, if you have any ideas, if you have any concerns from what you saw. By the way, this mortar is not in the public version, I believe. Yeah, I think this would be a nice ending for the video, trying this out. It's not finished yet, but this is a 120mm Russian mortar. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, as I said, leave comments below to tell me what you think. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.